I know. I look like an absolute mess. It is boiling hot here. In Australia, in Melbourne, we are now over 40 degrees Celsius. If you use Fahrenheit, I'm not doing the math for you. You work it out. It is bloody hot. In any country, it is just ridiculous right now. So if I look like a sweaty mess, if I'm pinker than usual, that's why. But we're going to try get through it and get on with tonight's video. And tonight we've got a bit of a special one, a first for this channel, at least the first that we're putting in the thumbnail. We've got Jiraiya from Naruto versus the Akatsuki. We're going to see how he goes against each individual member in a gauntlet style matchup. Now he's going to face all of them. We're not just going to stop when he loses to one of them, because spoiler alert, he doesn't beat all of them. But this is something I've been doing in a lot of my most recent videos when we discuss how strong certain characters are. I pit them with certain groups of members from the anime that they're in. So we're going to be doing that today, but that is going to be the main basis of the video. Try to keep it a little bit shorter than an hour-long gargantuan video. But enough of that, let's get this matchup started. We're going to start with Hidan and Kakuzu. I think this is a decent place to start. We have Hidan, who Jiraiya is beating without much difficulty. I don't think there will be too much of an argument from anyone watching this about, oh no, I reckon Hidan would have got the win. Jiraiya is a specialist in close to mid-range combat, and he can certainly take Hidan on in a close-range fight. We see Kakashi do it, and at that Kakashi, Jiraiya scales above him at that stage in the story, so he should definitely be able to hold Hidan off. He has massive AoE attacks with his fire ninjutsu. He's got the Toad Oil Bomb. If he goes Sage mode and he combines it with the Granny and Grandma Sage Toads, it's even more powerful AoE damage. And Hidan is really just not doing anything with it. He also has the Toad Mouth Bind Trap Jutsu, where Hidan can get literally disintegrated through being digested and crushed. He can use his hair senbone technique to just pierce him through with holes and immobilize him before tearing him apart with a Rasengan. He has numerous different avenues to take Hidan down. He can also wrap his mane of white hair around him, harden it, to defend himself against physical attacks in a Kakuzu-like manner with his Earth Ninjutsu, which we'll get into in a second. So even if Hidan does kind of find an opening and slice at him, very good chance that it's not even getting through that, that spiky mane of hair that Jiraiya has, that he's able to harden through ninjutsu. So Hidan is kind of getting no diff, and Jiraiya will win it 100% of the time in my books. Now we have Kakuzu though, a very controversial character. Some people reckon he's contending with the first Hokage. Other people reckon, he's just below that level. Some people reckon he's out of trash. I am somewhat in the middle. One of the first videos I ever did was ranking the Akatsuki. And, I'll give you a spoiler alert for that one, that character. I placed him about 5th place, I reckon. I reckon he's perfectly kind of in the middle of the Akatsuki. But he has a very interesting matchup with Jiraiya. Because in this fight, in all these fights I should say, we're picturing it in, old-fashioned times. This is the Roman Colosseum, and they're versing each other one-on-one. Now, Kakuzu knows just how powerful Jiraiya is. There's nothing much Kakuzu can do in his base form that will do anything against Jiraiya. So he's going to have to get his chakra monsters out as quickly as possible. Chakra monsters, for lack of a better term, into what to call them. But he's going to summon all of them. At this stage, the water mask hasn't been destroyed, so he has 4 chakra monsters. Now, the way Jiraiya would probably respond to this, he has a few different avenues he could do. He could summon one of his giant toads, something like, he could bring out Gamabunta, he could bring out the toad that he used against Pain. I'm blanking on its name, Gamma something or other. I'm really showing my lack of Naruto knowledge there. That's going to really annoy me. I'm going to remember it as soon as I finish this video. Drop it down in the comments, though, what that Toad's name was. And the one that Naruto summoned against Pain, the blue one with the 2 swords. He could summon any one of them, if not a couple of them. I reckon Jiraiya is able to summon an equivalent to Gamabunta, a little bit weaker, but an equivalent in size Toad very easily. I reckon he could summon quite a few in base. So, he could summon toads to kind of gain a little bit back of the numerical advantage. But what I think he would do, because I do think Jiraiya would struggle here a little bit in his base form. Now, because of the chocolate monsters being so numerous and being so kind of... They have more mobility about them compared to Sasori's puppets, where they're being controlled by Sasori through chakra threads. Kakuzu's beast can kind of can interact with people kind of almost seemingly outside of his kind of conscious thought. He can kind of give them an idea of what he wants and they do it. We never really see him kind of in his mind, all right, Fire Mask needs to do this, Water Mask needs to do this, blah, 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 blah. It all seems to kind of happen just in tandem with his will. So they have more flexibility in what they can do here, meaning the Toadmouth Trap might not be useful against Kakuzu due to the fact of there being numerous enemies that Jiraiya needs to fight. Maybe he won't be able to capture them all in that Toadmouth Trap. So what I do reckon Jiraiya would do, I reckon he would summon a Toad and get some distance and kind of play the long game and wait Kakuzu out while he summons nature energy. He can chuck up that barrier that he used against Pain to give him a better chance of defending against multiple enemies when they come into his barrier sphere. He channels the Sage Mode, he summons Fukusaka and... I'm forgetting the old woman's name. We're just going to call them the Granny and Grandpa Sage Toads. He'll summon those two, and then he's even upped the numerical advantage even more to be even with Kakuzu, or maybe even a greater numbers advantage depending on how many bigger toads that he could summon. But once he goes into Sage Mode, I reckon it kind of becomes a little bit of a no-diff fight. We know that he has massive AoE fire attacks, fire ninjutsu, whether or not in base or in Sage Mode, which would be counteracting Kakuzu's massive Searing Migraine AoE fire attack. We have Gamabunta that is powerful enough to block and deflect wind bullets from the Shukaku, the one-tailed Jinchuriki, and I think no one's going to argue that Shukaku should have more attack power than Kakuzu's masks. So Gamabunta's bringing powerful water style. We've got Grandpa Fukusaku who can do the giant water, beams that can cut through chameleon summoning creatures. So that would be able to cut through the monsters' masks as well. And I think that he would just be able to kind of tear through Kakuzu's monsters with just sheer ninjutsu. He could even, when he sees an opening, use his Bring Down the House jutsu, massive toad coming down and crushing the masks. He could also just use his big toads, like Gamabunta, to restrain them like that. We see Choji do that in the fight with Kakuzu, both when he's alive and when he's reanimated. So we know that they can be pinned down quite easily, all things considered. Yes, they get out of it time to time, but with Jiraiya being more deadly, I think he wouldn't have any trouble being kind of out ninjutsuing the chakra monsters themselves. Now, Kakuzu's defenses of his Earth Grudge ability where he can harden his skin is pretty formidable, and Jiraiya doesn't have an immediate counter. He can't use lightning style ninjutsu. He can use fire, wind, earth, and water. We've only ever seen him use fire and earth on the screen, but he does have water and wind attributes as well. But he can't get through it through the natural weakness to the earth style ninjutsu. But what he can do, you can't convince me that a giant Rasengan wouldn't tear through it. We see Naruto do it with a Rasen Shuriken, which would be stronger than Jiraiya's massive Rasengan. But Naruto almost takes out 3 of Kakuzu's lives with that. You cannot tell me that Jiraiya would not do damage and get through the Earth Grudge Fear technique. I believe it's called Earth Grudge Fear. I could be blanking on that. But the hardening his skin technique, without... You can't tell me that a giant Rasengan in Sage Mode wouldn't damage him, if not take him out. So I reckon Jiraiya has no difficulty there, and once he gets into his main body, he can just use that Toadmouth Trap, or the toad that sucks him into another world, like he did against Pain. I'm blanking on the name of that one as well. Jiraiya has some very nebulous naming abilities through his through his toad ninjutsu. I apologize if I've been saying frog before this, but through his toad ninjutsus, he has quite a few nebulous names. It gives him a wide range of abilities. He can make goddamn buildings with it. But yeah, I reckon once the monsters are taken down through ninjutsu and through his summons, Jiraiya would have no issue either giant Rasenganing through it or trapping him in one of his numerous traps to take Kakuzu out pretty easily. I would even go so far to say that Jiraiya would win this 100% of the time. But now let's get into two enemies that Jiraiya might not be able to take out 100% of the time. We've got Sasori of the Red Sand up first. Now, this is an interesting one, because I think we get into the first enemy that Jiraiya might not be able to defeat in a Colosseum arena without already going into the fight in Sage mode. Now, the reason... Look, there's a few outcomes here. The reason I say that is because Jiraiya, as we saw in the fight with Pain, his go-to is to jump on one of his giant toad summons and kind of bounce around the battlefield, get some distance, and let his summons do the fighting for him while he channels his nature energy. Now, while he's channeling that, he can perform, some taijutsu, he can perform his barriers. I imagine he might be able to perform some of his hair jutsu techniques as well. But either way, he can do some stuff, but he channels it and he gets his toads to do his fighting for him to build up that chakra. Now, in a fight with Sasori, this could prove to be problematic in a certain scenario. I don't think it's how the fight would go in character, but if Sasori foregoed the third Kazekage and just brought out the 100 puppet technique, I think he could very potentially just get the W on Jiraiya, with the sheer advantage in numbers and the fact that even if Jiraiya gets a single scratch, he is going to be taken out here. Now, I don't think Sasori would jump to that immediately, and we'll get into it, but I do think if we were playing with our controller up his ass and controlling what he did, if he just went, like I said, if they went into this fight in base, he went 100 puppets technique instantaneously, he might be able to get a very kind of dark horse win over Jiraiya here by poisoning him. I think Sasori is one of the most underrated characters in Naruto, thanks to just how sheer deadly he is and how much lethality he has over his attacks. That 100 puppet technique is really, really dangerous. Even without that, we have the third Kazekage puppet, which I think would prove to be more troublesome for Jiraiya than Kakuzu's monsters, simply for the fact of the Kazekage's Kekkei Genkai isn't just kind of massive ninjutsu attacks. He can transform them into massive spikes and spears and all matter of weaponry, which I think would do more damage to the toads of Mount Miyaboku. And I think they would prove to be more deadly, especially because of the poison on them. I don't think I'm just going to call him Gamabunta. Let's assume that that's what Jiraiya summons. I don't think that he is skilled enough to get away from the third Kazekage puppet without getting a scratch. Especially that World Order technique where it has the epicenter and spikes come out in a 360 massive AoE radius attack. Even just a small graze against Gamabunta would affect him. Now, it wouldn't affect him as quickly as it would a human just because of the sheer size, but it is something that would very much slow him down and allow Sasori to get in and potentially get a graze on Jiraiya, which would take him out. Now, I will also argue, though, that even if he does summon the third Kazekage puppet, it could go in Jiraiya's favor still. If he's summoning the giant squares, triangles, and rectangles and throwing of the iron sand and throwing them at Jiraiya, I could definitely see Jiraiya being able to not only dodge them, but also potentially kick them back like Sakura was doing. He's no Tsunade, but he does have more enhanced levels of strength than most ninja in the show. So I think he would be able to do things like that, especially with his barrier. He would be able to sense the attacks coming. And like we were saying, even if the toad gets poisoned, it wouldn't go down immediately the way a human would, where they get paralyzed. So I do think he might be able to get enough time to activate Sage mode. But it is important to note that Jiraiya not in Sage mode to begin with, and Sasori's third Kazekage puppet, that matchup there, I would say, is kind of 50-50 type of a matchup. Now, you could say that Jiraiya just reverse summons himself out of there, builds up Sage mode and comes back in, but in this case, he would be disqualified. This is kind of like an honorable fight in a Colosseum setting. Otherwise, there's too many like variables in what we're going into here. So that's the kind of matchups we're getting into. But I do reckon they would kind of be stalemating a little bit there until Jiraiya went Sage Mode. Once he goes Sage Mode, I don't think he would have any trouble overwhelming the third Kazekage puppet through his ninjutsu. I also reckon the 100 puppet technique would lose its value a little bit in the sense that Jiraiya's massive AoE attacks would destroy a lot of them, especially in a confined space like an arena setting. Now, in this matchup, the way I would envision it in my head is that the AoE attack takes out a massive chunk of it, and then the puppets go around the sides, what's left, to try and take out Jiraiya. But this is where Grandpa and Grandma Sage Toads here come in handy, because he's got extra sets of eyes now, and extra sets of hands in terms of throwing off jutsu as well, meaning he has more area to defend himself. I do think that it doesn't really give... The only thing it really gives Sasori is a little bit more of, what's the right word here, survivability through being able to switch his chakra core to different puppets, meaning he might be able to do that, you know, get around Jiraiya's defenses by sneaking his chakra core to somewhere where Jiraiya is not expecting. But due to Sage Mode being a high perception ability, I do think Jiraiya wouldn't be caught unaware. We see that he's fairly decent as well at taking down multiple opponents, like we see in his fight with Pain. He's no stranger to it. I don't think that the Toad, Sound Genjutsu would work on Sasori. That's a little bit of a what-if scenario, because obviously Sasori is hearing, like he can have a conversation with people, but strictly speaking, it's a human puppet with dead organs. Would the sound be able to transmit into his body? Either way, I don't think the fight would even get to that point. I will say as well, another win condition for Jiraiya, if he was to destroy the third Kazekage puppet and trap Sasori in the Toad Mouth Bind technique, Sasori's just screwed, because, you know, the 100 puppets can't be in that small restricted space, and he then gets really kind of manhandled against Jiraiya. So I reckon, all things considered, it's probably a 85 to 85% chance Jiraiya beats Sasori every time. But Sasori does have some win conditions, especially if we're doing this matchup with our controller in his ass. But in terms of in-character matchups, I do think it's kind of 80 to 85% in Jiraiya's favor. The specific fight with the Kazekage can kind of go either or in a lot of ways, but there's so many just what-if scenarios where I think my original assumption of it being 50-50 is a little bit off, and I'm going to retract that a little bit. But there are opportunities for Sasori to get the win thanks to his Kazekage puppet. I reckon in this matchup specifically, if he's fighting in character, that by the time he activates the 100 puppets, it's too late. If he activates it immediately, though, I think that I would give the chances of him winning 90% in Sasori's favor. I don't know if that's a controversial take, but I've said it. Now, this is a good time to stop and pause. If you're liking this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. But more importantly, if you haven't noticed, if I'm stumbling over myself a little bit, these videos are entirely non-scripted. I get an idea in my head, I come on, I talk about it. I go through different paths where I initially wouldn't have thought so. So it's one of those things where I'm trying to make this as raw as possible, something a little bit different to other anime YouTubers, just to have a little bit more of an originality to it. I can't contend in the producing standpoint and the time standpoint to kind of devote to this. So I'm kind of giving it my own flavor and spin. So please bear with me. I know it might be a little bit jarring for some people that's used to very kind of scripted and formulated content. Not that that is bad. But let's move on. We've got one of my favorite Akatsuki members in Datara next. Now, this is an interesting one because I'm going to kind of... In character, I think it goes very similar to Sasori. Data is attacking from mid to long range with his maybe dragon clay missile bombs, while Jiraiya is bouncing around on a Toad summon trying to build up Sage Mode. And once he goes Sage Mode, he kind of gets the advantage over Datara. However, the big talking point, the C4, the C0 technique, I'm not even going to go into. One, it would only make it a draw, and two, Jiraiya would just do the same thing as Sasuke and reverse summon himself out of there. I know I said he couldn't do that before, but in this specific matchup, since Sasuke did it, I'm allowing Jiraiya to use that to get away and get the W. The main talking point for Deidara is his C4 technique. Now, I once did a video on this way early on to my YouTube career where I think it was like my 4th or 5th video. No face reveal or anything at that stage. We're going back that far. Horrible audio. But I listed it as one of the most broken jutsu in Naruto, and I stand by that. This is a very, very deadly technique where if he uses it like Sasori, if we put our controller up his ass and he uses it right away, Jiraiya just straight loses. In fact, I would say that he loses so much that I would give it 100% to Deidara's favor instead of like the 85 to 90% like we were giving to Sasori. It is just so dangerous. Jiraiya would never have experienced it before, so his massive amounts of experience kind of won't be lending him any credence here. However, if they're fighting in character, that's one of Deidara's last resorts, and by the time he gets to that point, I think Jiraiya would have activated Sage Mode. And for anyone saying, oh no, Jack, like Deidara would have used that immediately because he knew what Jiraiya could do, Sage Mode was a very kind of tightly kept secret. So he wouldn't be prepared to handle something like that. And once Jiraiya goes Sage Mode, his perception of danger is escalated and heightened much more. And his just perception overall is much greater. He could probably sense the swarm of chakra, invisible chakra heading his way and be able to put himself in his own toad. Not so much reverse summon, but you know how he kind of swallows people with his toad? He can do that with that toad that has like the weird scrollish body. He could also do the toad mouth bind technique around himself to avoid it. And I reckon he would just be able to defend himself that way. His experience is enough while in Sage Mode to sense, no, something is really wrong here. I need to defend myself immediately. So I don't think it would work there. I think he would be able to escape it through his different abilities in, traveling dimensions, for a lack of a better term. And once he realizes that, he doesn't have a lightning style ninjutsu to super effective if we're talking Pokemon style against Deidara. But the long-range Senbone hand needle technique, the really fast jutsu that can't be avoided, I think would really do a lot of damage to Deidara. Things like even extending his hair to capture him, Grandpa Fukusaku extending his tongue out to capture him, different versions of long-range techniques, or in this case, once again, the sound genjutsu probably wouldn't work because of all the explosions, but I do think he would have no trouble once that C4 technique was immobilized to get in and get the win over Deidara through just ninjutsu and taijutsu. And we've seen him with his fight with Pain and Konan. He can kind of get the distance on people that have that distance advantage on him to begin with. So I would give, once they're in character, once he's in Sage Mode, I would give it to Jiraiya probably 95% of the time. If we were playing with our controller up Deidara's ask, 100% of the time to Deidara. Now then, let's go into the other big talking point. After these two, the next four would be a little bit quicker. We have Itachi and we have Kisame. Now, Itachi's the one that started this all, where he makes this comment in Naruto that a lot of people love to pick apart about the fact that even if there were more Akatsuki members, they would not be able to beat Jiraiya. And that if Itachi was to fight him one-on-one, no one would win. Meaning it would be like a double kind of kill, a double knockout type of thing. Kisame even goes as far to say that he would not be able to beat Jiraiya. And I'm going to go against Kishimoto here a little bit and pick that apart. Because we're going to start with Kisame, and I don't like what he's saying here. In the sense of, I definitely reckon Kishimoto could have changed his mind. We see how much the verse gets power scaled, or not, like power amplified as the story goes on. And the reason why I reckon this could be a big problem for Jiraiya is because, one, Kisame's got Samihara, who is absorbing Jiraiya's chakra, meaning his hair technique that can defend himself, that wraps around him, wouldn't work. So up close and personal, it's probably the first matchup where Jiraiya is actually on the defensive, because things like Rasengans are going to be swept away. He can literally rob 4 or 5 tails worth of chakra from a Jinchuriki at once with Samihara. Even getting in close with Jiraiya and a few slashes that were aimed well, Jiraiya would be, without half of his chakra type of thing, which would be detrimental to him, especially if he hadn't even summoned things like Gamabunta yet. However, if we say that he could get some distance from Kisame and get into Sage mode, it's still up in the air. Kisame loses Samihara's advantage, because if Samihara went to absorb Jiraiya's nature chakra, it would probably kind of get petrified like the Preta Path did against Naruto, where he took on too much nature energy and couldn't control it. Because Samihara is a sentient sword, I do think it's not outrageous to say something like that would work and the sword would get petrified. But Kisame is so deadly even without it. This is another one of those incredibly underrated characters. And the reason I say that is because, let's say that's happened. Jiraiya has been pushed back against Kisame, but he goes Sage mode, and then he pushes Kisame back. Kisame loses Samihara. The next step for Kisame is to use his giant water prison bubble technique. So Jiraiya then gets surrounded in a pool of water, a bubble of water, a gigantic ocean. Now, he can use water style ninjutsu. We don't know what he can use, but he can use it. And Fukusaku has water style ninjutsu, so they're not helpless. Their mobility drops significantly. But the reason why this is so deadly, even though Kisame can't merge with Samihara like he did against B, once they're in that giant bubble of ocean, Kisame unleashes a giant shark bomb technique, and I don't see what Jiraiya does against it. Because even though Samihara can't absorb nature energy, we know that ninjutsu that has been used in Sage mode can still be absorbed, the actual jutsu itself. Kisame's shark bomb techniques absorbs jutsu and grows stronger. So in this bubble of water where Jiraiya's mobility is suppressed, he can't use ninjutsu to defend himself here, because it's just going to get absorbed by Kisame's shark bomb and then, double, triple, multiply significantly in strength and take Jiraiya down. Then he can't use genjutsu because of being in the water. That's going to be severely lacking. And even if he could use it, it's going to take longer to work against Kisame. Even if it did the usual length of time, it's still not going to be enough to defend against water shark bomb being fired off immediately. And he can't use, even though his taijutsu is significantly amped in Sage mode, he's not a Might Guy. He's not opening the 7th gate and giving off a Hidorin? I think it's a Hidorin. Afternoon Tiger, I believe it is. A massive shockwave with a punch that can shake an island. There is no evidence that Jiraiya has that sort of power with taijutsu in Sage mode. And I don't believe he would be able to defend against this shark technique through those means. So I think that technique just wipes him out immediately. I know a lot of people might be thinking, Jack, that is just bullshit. Look at it narratively. Jiraiya's beating Kisame. And I do get your point. Narratively, it's a little bit hard to accept. But if we look at it logically, I don't see what Jiraiya has in his arsenal that counters the giant shark bomb technique, even when he is in Sage mode. Now, if you're going to argue, Jack, why wouldn't he just use the Toad Mouth Bind even without Sage mode in the beginning and trap Kisame like he did in the beginning in just plain old Naruto when they were trying to capture Naruto? And that's a good point. He could work with that first. But conversely, why wouldn't Kisame just use the water shark bomb there? Now, I get why he didn't use it in the beginning, because Kishimoto probably wouldn't have given it to him. But I don't see how Jiraiya defends against that either. Or the giant water prison technique, but mainly the giant shark bomb. I don't see how Jiraiya counters that. A plain old Rasengan isn't doing it, and if he's used it without Sage mode, his ninjutsu isn't even amplified. He can't even use his other summoning techniques in the Toad Mouth Bind technique. It's not like he can use the bring down the house jutsu type of thing. There's one other scenario, and we're actually going to touch on it. It's not a scenario in a win favor for Jiraiya. You might be thinking, hey Jack, why doesn't he use this technique? I'll get into why it doesn't work in Itachi section, which we're going to get into. But in this matchup, I would give it to I want to say 100% of the time to Kisame. I don't want to go in with so much gusto and confidence just because it is such a kind of esoteric battle. But I'm going to say 90% of the time to Kisame gets that win. That might be the most controversial thing in this whole video, but I can't really see any other outcome other than Kisame beating Jiraiya. Not necessarily that he's more powerful than Jiraiya if they were versing a different opponent, but in terms of Jiraiya himself, I don't see Jiraiya being able to beat Kisame, even though Kisame underplayed himself in Naruto and said that Jiraiya would beat him. But hey, that's my opinion. Let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Itachi. Now, on paper, Itachi is definitely stronger than Jiraiya. I don't think that there's anything Jiraiya can really do against Itachi except for one thing, and we're going to get into that. But Toad Mouthbind doesn't work. We've already seen it. Amaterasu can burn through it, and Itachi can get himself out. Itachi has too much mobility and quickness to be caught with something like the Bring Down the House Jutsu. In terms of the the hair senbone technique that can't be dodged, Itachi has the Yatamura that can block it. In terms of Tsukuyomi on Jiraiya, if you want to argue that, you know, Jiraiya has enough experience to fight Itachi through, you know, looking at his feet like Might Guy and go about it that way. Hey, you know, Jiraiya has the experience of a veteran shinobi who's fought in multiple world wars. I'll maybe give it to him there. But that also means his summons also need to have that ability, which I'm not sure that they do. So if Jiraiya summons like Gamabunta, Itachi could just chuck him in a Genjutsu. Now, even if you want to say that Tsukuyomi doesn't work on Jiraiya because he has, or he summons because he has the experience to avoid it, even if you want to say Jiraiya has the pre-sealing fire scrolls made in advance to kind of suck up and block Amaterasu, you can have that as well. But what is Jiraiya doing against Susanoo? I don't reckon that, like, I reckon there's other win conditions like Tsukuyomi for Itachi, but let's just say it doesn't work. He goes Susanoo. Jiraiya has nothing to get through the defenses, like I said, except for one, which is a bait. We're going to get into that soon. Giant Rasengans isn't going to work. The Sound Genjutsu might, but with Itachi's experience in Genjutsu, and we see it as well, Itachi's the man in this show that always says every jutsu has a weakness. The weakness of that jutsu is the build-up of it. Itachi's Sharingan would be able to see where it's coming from, and he would know that that threat needs to be eliminated immediately. So I don't reckon the Genjutsu would work. Jiraiya has no ninjutsu that can get through the Yatamura, and he has no defenses that are getting through the Totsuka Blade. He is just beaten on all fronts, except for one ability, and I can't believe I would ever say this as a win condition, but what do you guys think about the Swamp of the Underworld technique from Jiraiya? How does that work on Itachi in his Susanoo state? Would he not just start sinking into the swamp and kind of just be powerless with his Susanoo and be forced to counsel it to maybe get himself out through like a summons, the crow kind of pulling him out? Because we know that Jiraiya can use this even on things like a roof, and it captures one of the paths of pain in their fight in the Hidden Rain village. We know that a ninja can't just use chakra to like stand on top of it like water. So if Itachi goes Susanoo, just like logically speaking here, kind of like with Kisame and his Shark Bomb technique, if we look at it outside of the narrative of it being not like a finishing move, what does Itachi do against it to avoid his Susanoo being taken out? Because I don't think that it kills Itachi, but I can definitely see it being used to immobilize Itachi, forcing him to get rid of his Susanoo and get himself out through a different means, giving an opening for Jiraiya to then beat Itachi. Now, that's just the slight win condition I'm going to give Jiraiya. It's the only thing which makes this not a 100% victory in Itachi's favor. I'm going to give it maybe, look, I would say 80%, but I'm going to give it a 70% win to Itachi. 20% in Jiraiya's favor because of the Swamp of the Underworld technique. I admit, it's a lot more nebulous than my theory on the giant shark bomb jutsu and Jiraiya having no counter to it. But it is also Yeah, so because it's not as kind of, at least in my mind, foolproof as that, I'm only giving it a 20% victory, especially because the insane amounts of Amaterasu that Itachi can cast, the Tsukiyome that he can cast, potentially on Jiraiya himself, if not his summons, the Izanagi, the Izanami, it's just, I don't see Jiraiya getting the win. I'm giving an extra 10% to him though as well, just because Itachi said it would be a mutual defeat. So if we take the character's his word of mouth as well, 70% win chance of Itachi beating Jiraiya. The Dark Swamp technique, you might be thinking, why doesn't he just use that against Kisame and do a similar thing? Because of Kisame's giant water bubble technique, that makes him levitate, meaning the Dark Swamp technique wouldn't work there, which counters it. Could Jiraiya mix his Toad Mouth bind technique, though, with the Swamp of the Underworld one? That would be a very, very deadly ability, but now we're getting into real kind of fanfic, massive headcanon territory, but that would be an insane combination of jutsu that I just don't see anyone surviving. The whole Toad Mouth bind becomes a Dark Swamp while it's constricting an opponent. That would, like, kill people immediately. Is that a video idea I should do? Like, what are the most deadly combined ninjutsus to create just, like, absolute kind of game-stopping end boss killers? Potentially something I'll do in the future. Let me know in the comments if you like the idea of that. But let's go back to our gauntlet and see what we have. Jiraiya has in different percentages. Go back and watch the video to see where the percentages work. I do not remember them. Showing how this is not scripted. We have win against Hidan, win against Kakazu, win against Deidara, win against Sasori, loss against Kisame, loss against Itachi. So it's 4 wins, 2 losses. But we're going to get a couple quick wins here as well. We have Konan. We see on screen Jiraiya just gets a win on her. If we're counting Konan non-prep time, 100% of the time Jiraiya gets the win. I'm not even going to go into why. We see it on screen. Even without Konan kind of having killing intent there, not bloodlusters or anything, Jiraiya just has too many advantages over her to get around the paper ninjutsu. Konan with prep time, with the 10 billion paper bomb techniques. Ooh, I haven't even given this much thought if Jiraiya would be able to survive it. That's a good question. Narratively, there would probably be like the reverse summoning technique, but that feels really, really cheap. Potentially something like Gamabunta being able to jump out of like the pitfall of paper bombs colliding down on them. But yeah, I don't see what Jiraiya can do that was outside of reverse summoning that would get away from that technique. I'm just trying to think. There's nothing really in his arsenal unless he could just get an immediate win on Konan. But once again, overall, I'm giving the win straight to Jiraiya. Konan with prep time would... Not just Konan with prep time. Because Konan with prep time, even if she had that in her bag of arsenals, if she didn't use that immediately, like the first second, Jiraiya would just blitz her. But if we had a controller up her ass, I'm sure there's lots of perverts out there that would love that. But in terms of just that aspect of her character, if we could control what she did, first, second, the paper bomb technique, then I would give her the win 100% of the time, because I don't see what Jiraiya is doing to get out of that. But in terms of, she needs to even then not be in character. So I'm not giving it to her even as a pseudo win. Jiraiya beats her. Jiraiya beats Zetsu. I don't need to go into it. Massive AoE ninjutsu attacks would just completely overwhelm Zetsu, I reckon. Things like Sage Mode, Giant Rasengan's dead. Things like the Toad Mouth Trap, dead. Like, Zetsu's just not gone. So that brings us up to 6 victories for Jiraiya and 2 defeats. Now there's 2 more characters. There's Pain and there's Obito. Pain did say himself that if Jiraiya knew their secret, that he might have got the victory over them. Once again, it's a little bit like the Itachi line. I'm not inclined to believe that, because Jiraiya didn't have to contend with the Tendo Pain. He's by far and away the strongest one of the Pains. In a lot of ways, you could get rid of the other 5, and just Tendo Pain is a menace to fight against. And with how we got pushed so hard against 3 of them, even with an extra 2 added, and then on top of it with the Tendo Pain, I don't think that he would be out. Jiraiya would be getting the win. if Jiraiya had a lot of prep time and not just knew, like, a second before going into the fight, but had a chance to sit down and plan, I could see him coming up with a trap where he could trap some of them in the genjutsu, the sound genjutsu, and then trap some of them in like his toad mouth bind technique. So I could see him getting the victory that way with some prep time. So if you want to take the prep time example, I would probably still give it to Pain, but that might be a 60% win rate in Pain's favor, 40% in Jiraiya's. In terms of non-prep time and in character, this is the first time they're meeting in the story, just like how we had it with Datara. I reckon it would probably be, a 95% chance of Pain getting the victory. Can't speak on it whole, 100% certainty, just because Pain himself does bring up the potential of Jiraiya winning, so we'll call it 95% in Jiraiya's favor. But then we have Obito, and I haven't thought about this one much, because I just think Obito beats him. The intangibility through his Kamui technique means that none of the Toad Mouth Bind techniques, Bring Down the House Jutsus, Dark Swamp techniques, anything like that would be working on Jiraiya. The massive area AoE ninjutsu isn't working. He could get him in the genjutsu, the Toad Song. I could see that potentially working. As strategically brilliant as Obito is, I would still kind of slightly give it to Itachi, having the edge there in like battle IQ, just with how impressive Itachi is. But yeah, I know, of course, I'm talking about just one-eyed Obito here, not White Mask Obito. But then I reckon, he also has Wood Style Ninjutsu to help him in a Ninjutsu fight with Jiraiya. He can contend with him in Fire Style. Even if he was getting kind of caught in the Genjutsu, he could potentially use Izanagi to get out of there. So I would give it to Obito winning. This one, though, is a lot closer, I reckon. Once again, not that he's necessarily weaker than Pain. That's an interesting matchup in and of itself. But like we discussed, a person in a versus battle can beat people that are more powerful than them because of certain matchups. And the Toad Song Genjutsu is a really, really good counter to Obito. But he also has the ability, even without Izanagi, to just throw himself into a different dimension with his Kamui ability. So I don't know. I would give it to Obito. I would probably give it to him 80% of the time. So Jiraiya comes out of this with 6 wins and 4 losses. The losses to Obito, Pain, Itachi, and Kisame. I reckon probably the Kisame one will be the most controversial. I don't know if there'll be too much backlash against the other 3 beating him. There might be some backlash for Sasori not getting a win over him. I know a lot of people love him. But I feel like this has been a really, really great video, this gauntlet style. I love doing these, and I hope that passion kind of, reaches through the screen there. I find it so interesting kind of mapping out how I think these fights would go. But they're obviously so incredibly subjective that, you could have this fight go out in your head and you could be like, nah, Hedon just beats him. Like, it can be so different and varied, and that's why I love doing this type of stuff. And I love doing it more like this rather than calculating, this guy's 1/4 of the speed of light because he's done this feat, and if you multiply it by this, who is confirmed to be stronger of the blah 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 Steiner math from wrestling, you get to a certain figure, and it's like, to me that's a little bit boring. I like kind of going through the simulations in my head. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. 43 minutes long, wanted it to be shorter. I really need to learn where to speed things along, but it's just I was in it too much. But everyone, have a lovely night. I'll see you on the next one.